Her name was Grace Ellison. She was 13 years old and she lived in a blue house on the east side of Maplewood, Indiana with her father, Thomas, her stepmother, Diane, and Diane's two biological daughters, Madison and Brooke, who were 11 and 9 respectively and had learned early that the rules of the house applied differently depending on whose mother you were. Grace's mother, Ellen, had died of an aggressive cancer when Grace was 4 years old. She had almost no memories of her. A smell, sometimes. Lavender. The shape of a hand. Nothing solid enough to hold onto. Thomas Ellison was a good man in the way that some men are good, well-intentioned, conflict-avoidant, and fundamentally unable to see what was directly in front of him when seeing it would require him to do something uncomfortable. He worked long hours at a logistics company 40 minutes away. He came home tired. He believed, because he needed to believe, that things at home were basically fine. They were not basically fine. Diane Ellison had married Thomas when Grace was 6 years old. She had come with 2 daughters, a strong personality, and a very specific idea of how her household was going to be organized. In that organization, Grace occupied a particular position. Not quite guest, not quite family. Something in between that had no name but everyone in the house understood instinctively. Grace did the dishes. Grace did the laundry. Grace cleaned the bathrooms. Madison and Brooke did homework and watched television and had their friends over on weekends. Grace ate what was left. Wore what fit. Slept in the smallest bedroom with a window that didn't close all the way, which made winters in Indiana exactly as enjoyable as that sounds. She did not complain. Not because she didn't have things to complain about, but because she had learned very early that complaining accomplished nothing and cost something. She kept her head down. She went to school. She read books, library books, because buying them was out of the question, and she got good grades with a consistency that her teachers noticed and commented on and that Diane acknowledged precisely never. Thomas came home that Friday evening to a house that looked normal from the outside. Dinner on the table. Diane relaxed on the couch with a glass of wine. Madison and Brooke doing something on their tablets. He set his bag down and looked around. "Where's Grace?" "She ate early," Diane said, without looking up. "She wanted to go to bed." Thomas loosened his tie. Looked down the hallway. The light under Grace's door was on. He walked down the hall and knocked gently. "Grace? You doing okay in there?" A pause. Then, "Fine, Dad. Just tired." He stood at the door for a moment. Something felt off. Something always felt slightly off and he could never quite name it. "Okay," he said. "Sleep well, sweetheart." He walked back to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water and told himself things were basically fine. At school, Grace was a different person. Not louder. Not more dramatic. Just more present. Like she could breathe at a different depth than she could at home. She was in 8th grade at Jefferson Middle School, and she was the kind of student who made teachers think, this one's going somewhere. Not because she showed off or raised her hand constantly. Because she did the work with a seriousness that most kids her age couldn't manufacture even when they tried. Her English teacher, Mrs. Holloway, was 51 years old and had been teaching for 26 years and had a specific radar for students carrying something heavy. She had spotted Grace in the first week of 7th grade. She didn't push. She didn't ask direct questions. She did 2 things. She gave Grace extra reading recommendations, because she could see that books were oxygen for this child. And she made sure Grace knew her classroom was somewhere she was welcome before school, at lunch, whenever. Grace started spending lunch periods in Mrs. Holloway's room. They didn't always talk. Sometimes Grace read. Sometimes Mrs. Holloway graded papers. But the company was there, and the warmth, and the unspoken understanding that this room was safe in a way that not every room was. One afternoon in October, Mrs. Holloway looked up from her papers and said, "Have you thought about what you want to do? After school, I mean. College." Grace looked up from her book. "I think about it a lot." "What do you think?" "I want to be a doctor." She said it like it was both obvious and impossible. I know that's what. Mrs. Holloway set her pen down. Expensive. Far away. Complicated. All true. Also possible. Mrs. Holloway looked at her steadily. I want you to look into the state scholarship program. You qualify based on grades. I'll write your recommendation myself. Grace looked at her. Why? Mrs. Holloway picked her pen back up. Because someone should. Grace was 15 when the worst night happened. She had stayed late at school for a study group and gotten home 40 minutes after Diane stated curfew, a curfew that Madison, for reference, had never been asked to follow. She walked in the door and Diane was standing in the living room with an expression that Grace recognized immediately as the one that meant something was about to happen that couldn't be taken back. You think you can just walk in and out of this house whenever you feel like it? I was at school. I texted Dad. Your father isn't the one who runs this house. I am. And I am done. Diane stepped forward. Her voice had dropped into something cold and flat. I want you out. Grace went very still. I have talked to your father. He agrees it would be better for everyone if you made other arrangements. He agreed. Grace's voice broke. She stopped. Rebuilt. He agreed to kick me out. You can call it whatever you want. This arrangement isn't working. You've been nothing but a disruption in this family since the day you arrived. You are not my daughter. You never were. And I am done pretending otherwise. Silence. Grace stood in the entryway of the blue house with her backpack still on her shoulders, and she looked at this woman who had spent 9 years making sure she understood she didn't belong here. She didn't cry. She wanted to. But she didn't. She turned, opened the front door, and walked back out into the night. She called her father's sister, Helen, from a gas station 2 blocks away. Helen Ellison was 53 years old, unmarried, and lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in the next town over. She was a practical woman who had never particularly liked Diane and had said so to Thomas 3 years ago, at which point Thomas had asked her to please not interfere, and Helen had said fine, but don't call me surprised when something goes wrong. She picked up on the second ring. Grace? What's going on? She kicked me out. A pause. Then, where are you right now? Grace told her. Stay there. Don't move. I'm coming. Helen arrived in 22 minutes. She pulled up, got out of the car, looked at Grace standing outside the gas station with a backpack and no coat in October in Indiana, and said absolutely nothing. She just opened the passenger door. Grace got in. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Then Helen said, I've got a second bedroom. It's full of boxes, but there's a bed under there somewhere. We'll figure it out. Grace stared out the window. Dad agreed to it. Helen was quiet for a moment. I know. He just? I know, baby. They didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive. Helen's apartment was small and organized and smelled like Earl Grey tea and old paperback books, which Grace found immediately comforting. The second bedroom was, as advertised, full of boxes. They moved them together that first night, stacking them in the hallway, uncovering a full-size bed and a dresser and a window that actually closed properly. Helen found sheets. Grace made the bed. When it was done, they stood in the doorway looking at the room. It's not much, Helen said. It's mine, Grace said. Helen nodded once. Yes. It is. She turned to go make tea. Then she stopped. Your dad loves you, Grace. He's just weak, Grace said. Not with anger. With a kind of tired accuracy. Helen looked at her niece, this 15-year-old girl who had just been put out of her own home and was standing in a spare bedroom making it hers with her eyes, and she felt something fierce and protective rise up in her chest. I'm going to talk to a lawyer, Helen said. About legal guardianship. If that's okay with you. Grace looked at her. Yes. Please. Grace lived with Helen through high school. It was not a fairy tale transformation. Helen was not wealthy. The apartment stayed small. Grace worked part-time at a grocery store on weekends to help with expenses and save what she could. She cooked dinner 3 nights a week because Helen worked late, and Grace had discovered, somewhere around age 16, that she was actually good at it. What Helen gave her was not money or luxury. She gave her consistency. Accountability that felt like care rather than punishment. Someone who showed up to parent-teacher conferences and asked real questions. Someone who said goodnight every single evening and meant it. Grace's grade stayed exceptional. Mrs. Holloway's scholarship recommendation, combined with Grace's own application essay which she wrote about resilience without ever being sentimental about it, resulted in a full academic scholarship to Indiana University. The morning the acceptance letter came, Helen read it standing at the kitchen counter and then sat down at the table and cried in a way she would later describe as briefly and efficiently. Grace sat across from her. "You did this," Helen said. "We did this," Grace said. Helen shook her head firmly. "No. You did this. I just kept the lights on." Grace was a sophomore in college when her father called. She had not spoken to him since the night she left. He had called twice in the first month, and she had not answered, and then the calls had stopped and she had told herself that was fine and mostly believed it. When his name appeared on her phone on a Tuesday evening in November, she sat with it for 4 rings before she answered. "Grace." "Dad." A long pause. "I've been trying to find the right time to call," he said. "I know there isn't a right time." Grace was sitting at her desk in her dorm room. She had a textbook open in front of her. She closed it. "Diane and I separated 6 months ago," Thomas said. "She left. Took the girls." Grace didn't say anything. "I've had a lot of time to think. About what I let happen. About what he stopped. Started again. I told myself I was keeping the peace. Keeping the family together. I let myself believe things were okay because believing they weren't okay meant I had to do something about it. And I didn't." His voice had the texture of someone who has rehearsed something and is now discovering that rehearsing doesn't help. "I failed you. I know that. I'm not calling to make excuses." "Then why are you calling?" "Because I love you. And because I spent 9 years being too much of a coward to show it, and I don't want to spend the next 9 the same way." Grace looked at the wall of her dorm room. Outside, somewhere down the hall, someone was laughing at something. "I'm not ready to talk," she said. "Not yet." "Okay. That might take a while." "I understand. I need you to understand that what happened wasn't small. She told me my own mother didn't want me. I was 13 years old and she said that to me, and you were 40 minutes away, and I needed you to see what was happening and you didn't." Thomas was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough. "I know. And I'm sorry, Grace. I am profoundly sorry." The word profoundly surprised her. It didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded like a man who had been sitting alone in a house with the weight of his choices for 6 months. "I'll call you," Grace said. "When I'm ready. Don't push it." "I won't." She hung up. She sat at her desk for a few minutes. Then she opened her textbook back up. She had an exam on Friday and she was going to be ready for it. Grace was accepted to Indiana University School of Medicine at 22. She called Helen first. Helen's response was a sound that wasn't quite a word but communicated everything necessary. She called Mrs. Holloway second. Mrs. Holloway, who was now retired, said, "I knew it the first week of 7th grade. I want you to know that." She did not call her father. Not because she was punishing him. She just wasn't ready yet. The timeline of forgiveness doesn't follow anyone's schedule but its own. Medical school was the hardest thing Grace had ever done. Harder than the blue house in Maplewood. Harder, even, than the night she stood outside a gas station in October with a backpack and no coat. Because this heart was chosen. This heart was hers. And there is something completely different about suffering you have selected in pursuit of something you want versus suffering that was handed to you by someone else's cruelty. She chose it every single day. Even the days when she was running on 4 hours of sleep and had failed a practice exam and was eating cereal in her apartment at midnight wondering what she had been thinking. She chose it because she remembered being 13 years old and having nothing that was hers. No room, no peace, no safety, no certainty. And she had decided a long time ago that the rest of her life was going to belong to her completely. In the second year of Grace's residency, something unexpected happened. She was doing her emergency medicine rotation at Memorial Hospital in Indianapolis when a patient was brought in on a Thursday afternoon. A woman in her mid-50s. A fall at home. Possible fracture. Some internal bruising that needed evaluation. Grace was assigned to the case. She walked into the examination room with her clipboard and her white coat and her focused, professional calm. She looked up from the chart. The woman on the table looked back at her. It was Diane. The recognition happened simultaneously. Grace saw it move across Diane's face, confusion first, then recognition, then something complicated and uncomfortable settling behind her eyes. Grace stood completely still for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked back at the chart. "I'm Dr. Ellison," she said. "I'm going to be looking after you today. Can you tell me what happened?" Diane stared at her. "Grace." "Miss Foster," Grace said, reading the name on the chart. Diane had gone back to her maiden name. "I need to do an assessment. Can you tell me where the pain is most concentrated?" Diane's mouth opened and closed. "The fall," Grace said. "Can you walk me through it?" Something in Diane's expression shifted. She looked at this young woman in a white coat who was speaking to her with complete professionalism and zero personal effect, and she said, quietly, "My left side. And my wrist." Grace examined her. Ordered the necessary imaging. Explained the results clearly when they came back: 2 cracked ribs, a hairline fracture in the wrist, nothing requiring surgery but significant recovery time and pain management. She did her job completely and without any deviation from the standard of care she would have given anyone. At the end of the examination, Diane caught her arm. "Grace." Grace stopped. Diane looked at her. The woman who had spent 9 years making a child feel unwanted and invisible was lying in a hospital bed, and she looked, honestly, much smaller than Grace remembered her. "I don't expect," Diane started. Then stopped. "You didn't have to treat me." "Yes, I did," Grace said. "It's my job." "You could have asked someone else to take over." "I could have," Grace agreed. Diane looked at her for a moment. Her eyes were wet. "I was terrible to you." Grace said nothing. "I was jealous of you. You were Thomas's daughter and you reminded him of Ellen every single day, and I couldn't stand it. That was the truth of it. And I took it out on a child." She stopped. "There's no excuse for that." Grace stood at the side of the bed in her white coat. She thought about a 13-year-old girl being told her own mother hadn't wanted her. She thought about laundry and cold dinners and a window that didn't close in winter and a gas station 2 blocks from a blue house on the east side of Maplewood. She thought about Helen's spare bedroom and Earl Grey tea and someone who kept the lights on. She thought about all the distance between that girl and this room. "I know there isn't," Grace said. Diane nodded. Her hands were folded in her lap. She looked like someone waiting for a verdict. "I'm going to have the nurse come in and get you set up with discharge instructions," Grace said. "You'll need to follow up with an orthopedist for the wrist. I'll make sure the referral is in the system before you leave." She turned to go. "Grace." She stopped again. Didn't turn around. "You turned out," Diane's voice was careful. "You turned out remarkable." Grace stood in the doorway for a moment. "I know," she said. And walked out. Grace called her father that evening from her apartment. They had been talking for 2 years by then. Slowly. On her timeline, the way she had said. Thomas had honored that without exception. He had not pushed, had not expected more than she offered, had shown up consistently and quietly in the way that she needed. It was not the relationship she had deserved as a child. It was the relationship they were building as adults, and it was real even with everything in it. Something happened today, she said. She told him about Diane. Thomas was quiet for a long time. Are you okay? Yeah, she said. And meant it. I actually am. You treated her. She needed treatment. Thomas exhaled. Grace. You know what that says about you. It says I'm a good doctor, Grace said simply. That's what I was there to be. Another pause. Then Thomas said, your mother would have. She would have been. He stopped because his voice gave out. Grace sat with that for a moment. The mention of Ellen still landed differently than other things. Still touched something tender and old. Tell me something about her, Grace said. Something small. Something I don't know yet. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, she used to sing in the car. Off-key. Completely and happily off-key. She didn't care at all. He laughed a little. You do the same thing. I heard you once when you didn't know I was nearby. Exactly the same. Grace sat in her apartment in Indianapolis. Outside, the city did what cities do in the evening, lights coming on, traffic settling into its nighttime rhythm, the world moving at its regular pace. She pressed her hand flat against the kitchen table. Okay, she said quietly. That's a good one. Here is where we land. Grace Ellison is 36 years old. She is an attending physician in emergency medicine at Memorial Hospital in Indianapolis. She is known in her department for being exceptionally calm under pressure and exceptionally clear with patients who are frightened, which is most of them. Helen is 70 years old and has retired and moved into a smaller apartment and calls Grace every Sunday evening. The calls last between 45 minutes and 2 hours depending on what's happened in the week. They are the most reliable fixture in Grace's schedule. Thomas is 64. He and Grace have dinner together once a month at a restaurant halfway between Indianapolis and Maplewood. They talk about everything and nothing. The relationship is not without its complicated edges, but it is honest, and that is what Grace asked for and what Thomas has tried to give. Mrs. Holloway attended Grace's medical school graduation. She wore a yellow blazer and cried openly and told everyone nearby who Grace was and why she was important. Madison and Brooke, Diane's daughters, are adults now with their own lives. Grace has no relationship with them, holds no particular feeling about them either way. They were children too, once, inside the same house. They had their own versions of it. Diane lives in a smaller town now. Grace does not know much about her life and does not seek to know more. She treated her in an emergency room and spoke a truth without cruelty and left. That was the chapter, and it was complete. On a Tuesday evening in March, Grace is finishing a 12-hour shift when a girl is brought into the emergency room. 14 years old. Brought in by a school counselor, not a parent. Faint from not eating enough. Eyes that recognize immediately the specific look of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible. Grace sits with her for a few minutes after the medical work is done. The girl doesn't say much. Grace doesn't push. But before she leaves the room, Grace stops at the door and says, "Hey. You go to school?" The girl nods. "Is there a teacher there? Someone who makes you feel like you can breathe?" The girl thinks about this. Then nods again. "My history teacher." "Stay close to her," Grace says. "Okay. Stay close to the people who make you feel like you can breathe." The girl looks at her. Grace smiles. "You're going to be okay. I mean that." She walks out into the hallway. She's got 3 more patients to see and an hour left on her shift and a call with Helen on Sunday and dinner with her father next Thursday. She walks down the hallway of the hospital where she works and she belongs, and she has built something real from everything that tried to make her small. Grace Ellison was 13 years old when a woman told her she was unwanted. When a man who loved her chose peace over protection. When a house made it clear every single day that she was something less than the other people inside it. She walked out of that house at 15 with a backpack and the phone number of the one person who came without conditions. She did not wait to be rescued. She did not collapse into the unfairness of it. She found the one room where she could breathe, a classroom, a teacher's steady presence, a library card, and she held onto it. She built a life that was entirely hers. She became a doctor not to prove anything to Diane, not to show her father what he had missed, not to arrive triumphantly at any particular moment. She became a doctor because she was 13 years old in a public library with a biology textbook, and something in her said, this. And she never let go of that. Fate did not hand Grace Ellison anything. What fate did was make sure the right people appeared at the right moments. A teacher who wrote a recommendation. An aunt who drove 22 minutes without asking questions. A scholarship committee that saw what was on the page. A Thursday evening in an examination room where Grace got to show herself exactly who she had become. The stepmother who hated her since childhood did not make her. But she couldn't stop her either. Nobody could. If this story moved something in you, subscribe to Tale Vera and become part of a community that believes every story deserves to be told. Drop a comment below. We want to know, who was your Mrs. Holloway? Who kept the lights on for you? Tell us. We read every single one. See you in the next story.